In today's video, we're taking a look at a variety of NHL rumors. We're taking a look at the Florida Panthers maybe cutting some costs and trading Aleksander Barkov. Is that a possibility? Plus, will Byfuglien return? We're also going to look at the pending free agency of Alex Pietrangelo, and the Montreal Canadiens have signed themselves a Russian goalie from the KHL. Who is he and how will he fit into their system? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to cover today. Now, let's kick things off discussing the rumors surrounding the Panthers maybe trading Finnish captain Aleksander Barkov, and how this is linked to the New York Rangers organization, which is the main team that seems to be discussing this situation. Now, I've discussed numerous times in the last few months here that the Panthers likely are going to be going into cost-cutting mode. There's been a lot of talk about ownership wanting to cut costs and that maybe some free agents may not return. We might see them make some trades in order to shed some salary. That very well could be based on other moves they made leading into the trade deadline and what we were hearing about their offseason plans. That kind of suggested that to be a reality. But trading Captain Barkov is not something that we've really heard much about up until now. And it all comes from an article by Larry Brooks, of course, covers the Rangers closely for the New York Post, was asked in a recent mailbag article about the possibility of Barkov being traded and what would the Rangers be willing to give up for him. Now, of course, he mainly covers the Rangers. He didn't really speak much to the idea of whether or not the Panthers likely would make this trade. However, the person asking the question referenced the fact that the Panthers were in cost-cutting mode, like we've discussed here before, and that would Barkov be on the market? And if so, what would it take to get him to be in the Blue Shirts uniform? Well, he answered the question, and really the rumor kind of took off from there. Basically, what he said was that the only ones he would consider untouchable would be youngsters like Adam Fox and Kaapo Kakko, and other players with a no-move clause, which would include, obviously, Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad, and Chris Kreider. Other than that, he would say that a variety of those players on the roster would be up for grabs, and that a potential deal could be made there. But he didn't really go into the fact that it's something the Rangers are checking into, that the Panthers definitely would make this trade, that there's any legitimacy to Barkov being on the market. Hasn't been any other talk about Barkov being on the market, and I do think that this whole rumor around Barkov and how it spread is just a little bit crazy in my opinion. Now, obviously, Barkov is one of the top players in the NHL. He's a terrific two-way player because somebody who's going to be in the Selke conversation for a long time, puts up tons of points. And even though the Florida Panthers have not realized their full potential, had another stumble this year, I don't see them trading Barkov. His contract really isn't all that bad for what you get from him. He's got a really valuable contract, in my opinion. He's a young captain with a lot of good leadership skills, and really is one of the top players on the team and around the league. That would be really hard-pressed to win a trade involving a player of that magnitude. And even though I do agree that the Panthers likely will cut some salary, at least that's the word coming out of the ownership group, I don't think this is the way to do it. Like, the easy way to do it, like I've talked about in other videos before, is that they might not be bringing back all of their free agents. They have a couple of big-time forwards like Mike Hoffman and Evgeny Dadonov who are going to be looking for a significant amount of money, or at least a pretty, solid salary, and they probably won't bring back both of them. Maybe neither one of them return. I don't know, but either way, there's an easy way to do this. Be trying to find cheaper alternatives if that is indeed the course of action that they take. Like I said, obviously, they went all in, signed Bobrovsky, brought in an expensive head coach in Joel Quenneville, and things did not work out. But a lot of that had to do with the fact that the goaltending just wasn't up to par. Obviously, a lot of this is going to depend, too, if we see compliance buyouts from the NHL. We don't know how things are going to go yet while the season's on pause. When they return, will the cap remain flat? Will it go down? Will there be compliance buyouts to help cash-strapped teams? There's a lot of questions. We don't have answers right now, and if they do decide to go down the route of compliance buyouts, maybe we'll see the Panthers make a move in that regard as an extra feature to cut some salary. But either way, I don't see them trading a young captain. If he became available and it was known that the Panthers were willing to trade him, would the Rangers jump in or not? I think they absolutely would. And I do agree with Brooks' analogy that there would only be a handful of players that would be off limits. At the same time, I can see many other teams around the NHL lining up as well, trying to put a package together and see if they can land this player, because clearly guys like him don't become available every day. But the Panthers have done some crazy things in the past. I don't see this being on the horizon, and I would not put any stock into the rumors about Barkov being on the trade block. Now, there's also some articles between Sportsnet and the Toronto Sun discussing the potential return of Dustin Byfuglien. Of course, Byfuglien's been a hot topic over the last 3 or 4 days, ever since the termination agreement with the Jets has been officially announced, and he officially became an unrestricted free agent. Now, of course, just to remind everybody here again, he cannot sign with the team for the current season. So if the NHL is able to resume the 1920 season, Dustin Byfuglien is not eligible for a contract based on his termination agreement. He's only eligible for the 2020-21 season should he decide he wants to play and move forward with another team at that point. Now, of course, the 2 articles here that I'm referencing both indicate a variety of teams that would likely show interest. I know Chris Johnson of Sportsnet in his article references the fact that he believes there'd be at least 20 teams lining up to talk to Byfuglien, and I concur with the sentiment. I think Byfuglien's, like I said before in other videos, he's a very unique player. He's got a lot of experience, and I think that most teams would be interested, especially if they could get him on a short-term, not too expensive contract for 1 or 2 years at a lower amount. Clearly, this was not about money for Byfuglien. He left $14 million on the table, but based on other reports, like I've said, it just doesn't appear as though that it was really all that personal against the Jets. I really just don't think Byfuglien has it in him to continue playing, and I am very, very doubtful that he returns. But based on these articles, a couple of teams that would be high up on the list, should he even want to consider it, I think would be the Florida Panthers and the Minnesota Wild. Now, of course, we talked yesterday about the Leafs and Habs being linked, but of course, because of those markets and the fan base, there are always teams that are linked to many players, and I just don't see really that being a strong possibility, mainly due to the fact I just don't see him playing. But of course, with these other teams, there just seems to be a little bit more of a personal connection that might intrigue him a little bit more. Like the Panthers, obviously there's the connection, the old Chicago connection there with Dale Talon, Joel Quenneville. Obviously, he played a lot with them in the past when they were running the Blackhawks, and they had a lot of success there. So clearly, that might be a comfortable spot. Most players, especially, with obviously Florida being a very warm climate, it's attractive for other reasons as well. So if they could get him on a short contract for not a lot of money, I think the Panthers would have a better chance than most. And even for him to go home and play in his home state of Minnesota with the Wild, that might be an option that might lure him basically out of retirement as well. But at the same time, like I said before in yesterday's video, it's been a long time since Byfuglien's been on the ice. Really have concerns over his conditioning. He went through a surgery, a rehab. He obviously wasn't very active. And I just don't see it happening. By the time that he could get on the ice with a team, it's going to be a long time into the future. And I just don't see it happening. But if any team stand a chance, I would put Florida and Minnesota, just in my own personal opinion, near the top of the list. As I mentioned as well, I want to discuss the free agency here of Alex Pietrangelo, St. Louis Blues captain, pending UFA. Of course, we've seen the Blues make many moves recently, which is kind of stirring the pot around his future with St. Louis. We've seen him sign lots of other players to new contracts and extensions, and many people are asking, why is their captain still not signed? They're giving out all these other deals, but in my honest opinion, I do think Doug Armstrong, the GM of the Blues, intends to want to try to keep Pietrangelo, and he's probably trying to fill out his roster to see everything he has and kind of line everything up as best he can to see what it's going to take to fit Petro into the future here. Now, clearly, like I said, if you have Pietrangelo's contract done, but you don't have a lot of other deals done, there's a lot of other variables there that might be too difficult to navigate through, whereas if he's the last one to be done, you can see what you can offer without making any moves, and if you make a move here or there, what you can do to free up some money in order to make the necessary space to keep the captain in the fold. Now, of course, like I mentioned before, there's a couple of factors here that are at play that we don't know how things are going to go. If they get a compliance buyout, that could certainly solve things. There's been talk about maybe buying out Alex Steen as a way to cut costs, to make room. Obviously, he's going into the final year of his contract. You've got Tyler Bozak maybe being a trade candidate. I'm not sure there'd be a big market for Tyler Bozak at $5 million for 1 year, but still, he's played well for the Blues overall, especially as a third-line kind of player, and I'm not really sure he'd be high on their list to want to move, but at the same time, it's based on the contract. Maybe there's a possibility with that one, and as I mentioned before, they might not want to have as much money tied up on goaltending, and maybe we'll see them find a new home for Jake Allen to ride out the remainder of his contract. He played a lot better last season after rebounding from the year before, which wasn't all that great, but still it's clear that Bennington's the guy in the future. They may not want to have a $4 million backup goaltender who maybe he could go on and try to find a 1A, 1B situation, or maybe a starting role with another team, because there is a handful of teams around the league that are going to be looking for more help between the pipes. So that might be a possibility as well. But I do think that there's a possibility that Pietrangelo can stay. It's just going to be very tricky for Armstrong to get this done. But in the article with Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic, he basically reiterates that the long-term plan is to still want to sign a long-term deal with the Blues to remain there. But as we all know, the market is going to be a little bit unique once we hit the offseason, just because of everything that's going on and reduced revenues, etc. Salary cap uncertainties at this point, and it very well might come down to all free agents, him included, taking less money than they probably originally were thinking of looking at. So clearly there's a possibility he could still stay, but I think Armstrong is trying to navigate through the remainder of the roster, fill out everything else before he makes too many other moves to figure out how to keep the captain in the fold. Now lastly here, as I mentioned, the Montreal Canadiens have signed a Russian goaltender from the KHL, Vasili Demchenko. He's 26 years old. Obviously, the Montreal Canadiens goaltending situation beyond Carey Price has some question marks for sure, but they do have some interesting guys in the system. Longer term, of course, they signed Keith Kincaid last year as a backup. That did not work out. He spent most of the year in the minors. It's a really failed experiment. He won't be back. That's certainly the only part of this equation that's really clear. Of course, they have Caden Primo in the system, who's a potential goaltender of the future, in my opinion. You got Charlie Lindgren, who's been around for a fair bit of time now, but the last couple of years, in my opinion, have not been good for him, and I just don't really see him ever being an NHL starter. I'm not even sure he's going to be a real good NHL backup, to be completely honest, but I guess we'll see if the opportunity presents itself. So this signing by Montreal to bring in Demchenko is pretty well a low-risk experiment to add an extra piece of depth in the goaltending situation. I'll show you a bit of his stats here from the last number of years playing in Russia. You'll see he's played in the KHL for 6 years. Like I said, he's 26 years old. He's 6'1", 165 pounds. His stats are good. They're not going to blow you away. It doesn't appear as though he has all-star goalie written all over him. He would have been probably snatched up by now if he had been in that situation. One of the teams he was playing with for a few years in the KHL, the Tractor team, had placed him on waivers last year. He ended up going to a new team after that. So that, says something there. I don't see him having star written all over him like Shesterkin or Sorokin, who's coming over soon as well. Obviously, those guys have been stars since their much younger years. I just see him as maybe, and I stress maybe because he's not a goalie I'm super familiar with, but based on everything I know about him, he might be able to be a decent backup goaltender at the NHL. Maybe he'll exceed our expectations. I guess we really won't know until he comes over and starts playing, but it gives them an extra piece to really fill out their NHL and AHL roster. I would not completely rule out the possibility of Montreal maybe looking for another more experienced backup as well. I guess we'll see what Bergevin decides to do. But because of his age, he gets a one-year contract, only under $800,000. Obviously, like I said, he's 26. He's coming over. There's also no European clause in his contract, so he cannot be assigned back to a European team. So he will definitely play in North America for either their NHL or one of their minor league affiliates. So he's going to have a spot there somewhere. So between he and Lindgren and Primo, one of them will likely end up being the backup to Price, and the other two likely form your tandem at the American Hockey League level. Of course, they have an East Coast team to consider as well. Like I said, I would not completely rule out even bringing in another goalie with more experience, but I guess we'll see how things go once he comes over and go from there. So like I said, I don't see a big star goaltender, but you just never know. Sometimes it's a low-risk signing that's well worth it for Montreal to take the chance to add to their depth in between the pipes. Let me know your thoughts on this player and everything else we discussed today's video, and we can continue the conversation down in the comment section. Again, I just want to take a minute to thank all of our channel membership holders for your support. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.